My husband spent our savings on his mistress, so I sold his car and paid for my dream cruise. Subscribe to follow my journey and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. December 2024. The text arrived while I was making Richard's favorite dinner, beef bourguignon that had been simmering for hours. 35 years of marriage, and I still tried to please him. My phone lit up with a message from our bank. Withdrawal confirmation, $3,000. My fingers froze mid-chop on the carrots. That's strange, I muttered, opening the banking app. The money had been transferred from our joint savings, the account we'd been building for my dream Mediterranean cruise after retirement. I set down the knife and wiped my hands on my apron. "Richard?" I called out. No answer. His Corvette wasn't in the garage when I'd come home from work. That car, his midlife crisis purchase 3 years ago. I'd helped him buy it, contributed nearly half from my accounting salary. "It's our reward," he'd said then, "for all the hard work." The front door opened just as I was about to call him. "Something smells good," Richard said, hanging his coat with practiced precision. His silver hair was freshly cut, his cologne stronger than usual. "Did you withdraw money today?" I asked, showing him my phone. He barely glanced at it. "Oh, that. The Corvette needs some work. Nothing to worry about." He kissed my cheek, a quick peck that felt like an afterthought. During dinner, Richard talked about golf and his upcoming retirement. I nodded, smiled at appropriate moments, and poured more wine. "The cruise fund is still on track?" I asked casually. "Of course." His eyes didn't meet mine, though we might need to push it back a few months. "Market's volatile." Our son Adam called during dessert. He and his sister Emily were planning a surprise visit next weekend. Richard spoke enthusiastically about seeing them while I cleared the dishes. Noticing how he straightened his posture became more animated. A performance. Later, as we prepared for bed, Richard's phone chimed. He snatched it quickly, turned away to read the message, then placed it face down on the nightstand. "Work," he muttered. "At 10:30 p.m.? I asked. "The Tokyo office needs numbers for tomorrow's meeting." He slid under the covers, keeping to his side of the bed. I switched off my lamp and lay in the darkness, listening to Richard's breathing. It wasn't the steady rhythm of someone falling asleep, but the controlled pattern of someone waiting. After 30 minutes, he slipped out of bed, taking his phone. I didn't follow him. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, tallying small changes I'd been ignoring for months. Late nights at the office, new clothes, distracted conversations, criticism of my appearance that had become more frequent. "You could try a little harder," he'd said last week, eyeing my comfortable sweater and jeans. "You used to care how you looked." Our anniversary dinner in November, he'd been checking his phone constantly. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd snapped, "Not everything revolves around you, Martha." It wasn't the first time I'd noticed these changes. For at least 6 months, Richard had been pulling away, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. But I'd convinced myself it was stress from his upcoming retirement, refusing to see what was right in front of me. From downstairs, I heard Richard's low laugh, the genuine one he rarely used with me anymore. My stomach tightened. Tomorrow, I decided, I would check our accounts more thoroughly. 35 years as his wife, 15 as a professional accountant, yet I'd handed him complete control of our retirement funds without question. The thought made my cheeks burn with something between shame and anger. Who was this woman who didn't verify where her future security was going? I barely recognized her anymore. Neither, it seemed, did Richard. January 2025. January brought bitter cold to Chicago and a chill to my marriage that no thermostat could fix. Richard came home later each night, smelling of unfamiliar perfume and expensive restaurants. My questions were met with impatience or silence. I examined myself in the bathroom mirror one morning, searching for the woman he'd once loved. At 57, I wasn't the fresh-faced bride from our wedding photos, but I'd aged well, kept my figure, maintained my honey blonde hair. What had changed? When had his eyes started sliding past me as if I were furniture? This wasn't a sudden shift. Looking back, I could trace the pattern to last spring. Small criticisms that grew more frequent, decreased physical affection, the separate vacations he insisted on for networking. But even as a professional accountant, I'd never questioned our financial arrangements, trusting him with our investment accounts while I managed day-to-day expenses. "We're having dinner with the Hendersons tonight," Richard announced at breakfast. "Don't forget." I looked up from my coffee. "I have that monthly report due tomorrow. I told you I'd be working late. Reschedule it." He didn't look up from his phone. Wear that blue dress, the one that actually fits. The barb stung, but I swallowed my retort. I'll try to finish early. 8 hours later, I sat beside Richard at Giovanni's, our favorite Italian restaurant, across from Bill and Karen Henderson. Richard dominated the conversation, discussing his retirement plans, the market, his golf game. "And what about your cruise, Martha?" Karen asked during a rare pause. "Still happening this year?" Before I could answer, Richard cut in. "We're reevaluating our timeline. Martha might want to work a few more years." "That's not what I began. "Honey, you know how bored you'd be at home all day," Richard laughed, patting my hand dismissively. "Martha needs structure. Always has." Bill nodded sympathetically. Karen was the same until she found her painting group. I forced a smile, feeling invisible. When the waiter asked about dessert, Richard answered for both of us. "Just coffee." Martha's watching her figure. In the car afterward, tension filled the silence. "You undermined me all evening," I finally said. Richard kept his eyes on the road. "You're being dramatic. You made decisions about our retirement without consulting me, criticized my appearance indirectly, and treated me like a child." He sighed loudly. "Maybe if you contributed more to conversations, I wouldn't have to speak for you." "Contributed? I couldn't get a word in." "See? This is why I hate these dinners." Richard's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "You always make everything about yourself. That's not fair, and you know it." My voice shook. He pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. "Maybe you should try harder to be interesting, Martha. People change. They move on." The words hit like a physical blow. I got out without responding and walked inside, leaving him in the car. Instead of following me, I heard the engine start again. Through the living room window, I watched the red taillights of his Corvette disappear down our street. I reached for my phone to call Diane, my oldest friend, then hesitated. What would I say? That my husband of 3 decades might be having an affair? That he found me boring? The humiliation burned too deeply. Instead, I opened our banking app. Another withdrawal. $2,500 2 days ago. Something called investment opportunity, according to the memo line. This was the 3rd such withdrawal in 2 months, but it was from our regular joint account that I had access to, not the investment portfolio Richard managed separately. Richard didn't return until after midnight. I pretended to be asleep when he slipped into bed, keeping as much distance between us as possible. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I would start looking more carefully. February 2025. February brought snowstorms and growing distance. Richard spent nights on the couch, claiming my snoring kept him awake, a problem he'd never mentioned in 35 years of marriage. The empty side of our bed mocked me nightly. During my lunch break, I reviewed our account statements, discovering several restaurant charges in neighborhoods I'd never visited. One receipt caught my eye, $347 at Maison Bleue, a French restaurant downtown where Richard had proposed all those years ago. Richard handled most of our investment and retirement accounts, while I managed our household budget and personal accounts. This division of financial responsibility had always made sense. He enjoyed following the markets, and I was busy with our children and my career. Now I realized this arrangement had left me vulnerable. That night, I prepared Richard's favorite meal and opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving. I wore the blue dress he'd mentioned, applied makeup carefully, and waited. 7 o'clock passed, then 8. At 9, I texted him. "Working late," came his reply. "Don't wait up." I sat at our perfectly set table, staring at the cold food. Then I did something unprecedented. I drove downtown to Richard's office. The building's security guard recognized me. "Evening, Mrs. Wilson. Looking for Richard?" "Yes, is he still upstairs?" The guard checked his log. "No, ma'am, he left around 6. My hands trembled as I returned to my car. I drove past Maison Bleue on impulse. Richard's red Corvette wasn't in the parking lot, but something compelled me to go inside. The maitre d' greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Wilson, lovely to see you again." I hadn't been there in years. "You remember me?" "Of course, though your husband was just here last week with his colleague. Business dinner, I assume?" My mouth went dry. "Yes." "Who was he with?" "Young lady. Blonde." They took the private dining room. I thanked him and left quickly, gasping for air outside. A colleague. In our special restaurant. In a private room. At home, I found Richard watching TV casually. "Meeting run late?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Budget discussions. Brutal." He didn't look away from the screen. I made dinner. It's cold now. I grabbed something downtown. At the office? I pressed. He finally looked at me. What's with the interrogation, Martha? Just curious about your day. Well, it was long and I'm tired. He turned back to the TV. The next morning, I woke early and checked our accounts again. A new transaction appeared. A $3,500 withdrawal marked investment opportunity again. I printed the statements, tucking them into my work bag. At the office, I buried myself in spreadsheets until lunch, then locked my door and called our bank. After verifying my identity, I requested access to all transactions from the past 6 months. I'll need to send these to your home address, Mrs. Wilson, the representative said. No, I replied quickly. Please send them to my office. I gave her the address, ignoring the knot in my stomach. Why was I sneaking around in my own marriage? I also requested information about our investment accounts I technically co-owned, but had never monitored. The representative explained I would need to submit separate forms for those records due to privacy protocols. I requested the forms. That evening, I stopped at the grocery store, delaying my return home. As I reached for a carton of eggs, I noticed a familiar red Corvette in the parking lot. Richard's car, but he'd texted that he was working late. I abandoned my cart and walked toward the windows, scanning the lot. There he was, leaning against his car, laughing with a blonde woman at least 20 years younger than me. She reached up, straightening his tie, her hand lingering on his chest. Richard caught her fingers, kissed them, then opened the passenger door. They drove away together, neither noticing me standing frozen in the store entrance. That night, I said nothing. I watched Richard lie to my face about working late, about traffic, about a client dinner. I smiled and nodded, noticing how he didn't ask about my day, how his eyes never fully met mine. The stranger sharing my bed was no longer the man I married, and perhaps never had been. March 2025. The text message appeared on a Sunday morning in March while Richard showered. His phone vibrated on the kitchen counter where he'd left it. I shouldn't look. 35 years of marriage, and I'd never invaded his privacy. But the name flashing on the screen, Rebecca, compelled me forward. Can't wait to see you tonight, my love. Bring the good wine. I've got a surprise for you. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the granite. My suspicions, now confirmed, felt like concrete in my stomach. I'd been a fool. When Richard emerged from the shower, I was sitting at the dining table, staring at the banking app on my laptop. The statements from my office had arrived yesterday, revealing a pattern of withdrawals totaling over $45,000 in the past 6 months, almost half our retirement savings. These weren't from our regular accounts that I monitored, but from the investment portfolio Richard managed. Morning, Richard said cheerfully, pouring coffee. Beautiful day. I looked up at him, this stranger with my husband's face. Who's Rebecca? His cup froze halfway to his lips. What? Rebecca. The woman texting you about tonight. A flash of panic crossed his face before settling into irritation. You checked my phone? Seriously, Martha? Answer the question, Richard. He set down his cup, sighing dramatically. A colleague. We're working on the Anderson account. On Sunday night? With the good wine? My voice remained steady. And what about the $45,000 missing from our investment accounts? His expression hardened. You've been spying on me. No, Richard. I've been paying attention, finally. I turned the laptop to face him, showing the list of withdrawals. Where's our money? Investments? Market opportunities? Things you wouldn't understand. I'm an accountant. Try again. Richard's face flushed. This is my money too. I earned it. We earned it. For our retirement. For the cruise. He laughed, a harsh sound I'd never heard from him before. That stupid cruise. Is that all you think about? Each word landed like a blow. I'd spent decades dreaming of sailing the Mediterranean, of seeing Santorini's blue domes and Venice's canals. It wasn't just a vacation. It was the reward for a lifetime of compromise. Where is the money, Richard? None of your business. Half of it is literally my business. He slammed his fist on the counter. Fine. You want to know? I'm investing in my future. A property in Michigan. Lakefront. Our future? His silence answered everything. I stood, legs surprisingly steady. I'm going to visit Adam today. Don't wait up. Instead of driving to our son's house, I went to see Diane Thompson, my oldest friend and a family law attorney. I'd avoided this conversation for months, but no longer. Diane listened without interruption as I described the withdrawals, The lies, Rebecca. When I finished, she took my hands. Martha, I'm so sorry, but you need to protect yourself now. What do you mean? If he's planning to leave, he's already been moving assets. We need to document everything before more disappears. The word leave struck me like lightning. Despite everything, I hadn't allowed myself to think it. He wouldn't. Martha. Diane's voice was gentle but firm. He already is. I drove home in a daze, the spring sunshine mockingly bright. Richard's Corvette was gone from the garage. On impulse, I went to his home office and opened his desk drawer. Empty. The file cabinet, half empty. In our bedroom, I noticed gaps in his closet where suits had hung that morning. My phone rang. Adam. Mom? Are you coming over? I got delayed, I managed. Rain check? Everything okay? Fine, sweetheart. Just tired. After hanging up, I called Diane again. I need a recommendation for an investigator. A good one. 3 days later, I sat in Diane's office again, staring at photographs spread across her desk. Richard and Rebecca entering restaurants, hotels. Richard signing papers at a realtor's office. The most painful, Richard and Rebecca touring a lakefront property in Harbor Springs, Michigan, the investment opportunity that had drained our savings. The investigator's report was coldly precise. Rebecca Stevens, 32, junior executive at Richard's company. Relationship approximately 7 months old. Property in Harbor Springs, Michigan. Down payment of $25,000 from our joint account, with a mortgage application in process for the remaining $425,000. Richard had been approved for the loan but had not yet closed on the property. What do I do now? I whispered. That depends, Diane said. What do you want? For the first time in months, I knew exactly. April 2025. April arrived with surprising warmth and the bitter taste of confrontation. I waited until Richard returned from a business trip to Michigan, placing the investigator's folder on the dining table as he walked through the door. What's this? He asked, dropping his overnight bag. Evidence. My voice was steadier than my hands. Rebecca Stevens, 32, the lakefront property you're in the process of buying. Our retirement fund. Richard's face drained of color as he flipped through the photos. I expected denial, anger, even remorse. Instead, he laughed, a hollow sound that chilled me. Well, this is embarrassing, he said, closing the folder. Embarrassing. You stole our future and it's embarrassing? No, Martha, it's embarrassing that you needed a private investigator to figure out what was happening right under your nose. He loosened his tie. Though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You've been sleepwalking through life for years. I've been building our life, I said, my voice rising. Working, raising our children, maintaining our home, playing it safe, every day the same, every year the same. Richard poured himself a scotch, not offering me one. Do you have any idea how suffocating that is? So suffocating you had to steal from me? I didn't steal anything. I invested in happiness, something you wouldn't understand. With a woman half your age? Richard's smile was cruel. Rebecca appreciates ambition, energy, life. He gestured vaguely at me. You think I want to spend my retirement with someone who's aging like you? The words sliced through me. I gripped the back of a chair to stay upright. Get out, I whispered. Gladly. Richard drained his glass. I'll send someone for my things tomorrow. What about our house? Our savings? We'll let the lawyers sort it out. He grabbed his bag. Though I wouldn't get too comfortable if I were you. The house will need to be sold. You can't just... Watch me. He paused at the door. You know, Martha, Rebecca asked me last week why I stayed so long. I couldn't think of a good answer. After the door closed, I collapsed into a chair, shaking uncontrollably. 35 years, 2 children, countless shared dreams, all dismissed in minutes. I didn't cry. Instead, I called our children. Adam arrived first, bursting through the door like a storm. Where is he? I'll kill him. Emily followed an hour later, calmer, but with ice in her eyes. Mom, what happened? I told them everything. The affair, the money, the house in Michigan that Richard was in the process of purchasing. I should have seen it sooner, I admitted. The signs were there for months. Adam paced, cursing. That selfish bastard. All these years you supported his career. Raised us, and this is how he repays you? Emily took notes, her lawyer's mind already calculating. You need to freeze the accounts immediately, she said, before he takes what's left or finalizes that property purchase. And file for divorce, Adam added. Today. It's not that simple, I replied. Everything's joint. The accounts, the house. I paused. Though his precious Corvette is in both our names. Emily's head snapped up. The Corvette is in both your names? Yes. I contributed 40% when he bought it 3 years ago. A thin smile spread across Emily's face. Mom, you might have more leverage than you think. Adam stopped pacing. Wait, is that the Corvette Dad was showing off at your office party last year? Yes, why? Because I remember that collector guy, Timothy something, practically drooling over it. Said he'd been searching for that exact model and color combination for years. Even offered Dad an obscene amount for it on the spot. Emily's eyes widened. Timothy Gaines? The classic car collector who owns that tech company? That's him, Adam confirmed. Mom, Emily said slowly, I think we just found a bargaining chip. The next morning, I called our bank and froze the joint accounts. I contacted my company's HR department and rerouted my direct deposit to a new personal account. I changed the locks, a small rebellion that felt enormously satisfying. That afternoon, Richard texted, What the hell? The accounts are frozen. I didn't respond. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't trying to smooth things over. 2 days later, an email arrived from Richard's lawyer, demanding half of all assets and immediate access to the house. The signature block showed a prestigious downtown firm. Expensive, very expensive. I forwarded it to Diane, adding only, Now what? Her response came within minutes. Now we fight. Come to my office tomorrow. And Martha, bring the Corvette's title. That night, I slept in the center of our bed, spreading my arms and legs like a starfish. A small victory, but mine, alone. Late April 2025. By late April, I'd grown accustomed to the silence in the house. No more pretending, no more walking on eggshells, just emptiness I was learning to fill with my own presence. Diane had connected me with Jack Levinson, a divorce attorney specializing in cases involving financial deception. His office was less polished than Richard's lawyers, but his eyes were sharper. He's banking on your surrender, Jack said, reviewing my case. Men like Richard expect their wives to crumble. Not this wife, I replied. Good, because this will get ugly before it gets better. I left with homework. Catalog every asset, document every account, record every conversation with Richard. The task was overwhelming until Adam and Emily arrived that weekend, armed with laptops and determination. Operation Asset Recovery, Adam declared, setting up in the dining room. Emily ordered pizza while I pulled out financial records. For hours we worked in silence, broken only by occasional questions or discoveries. Dad's been planning this for at least a year, Emily said, reviewing the statements. These withdrawals started small, then increased. Classic pattern. The house in Michigan is still in escrow, Adam noted, checking property records online. The final purchase hasn't gone through yet, but he's paid the earnest money from your joint savings. What about the Corvette? Emily asked. I pulled out the title. Both our names, Emily smiled. Perfect. The doorbell rang. Not pizza delivery, but Richard, unexpected and unwelcome. I opened the door without inviting him in. I need clothes, he said flatly. And my files. Your lawyer should contact mine to arrange it. Don't be ridiculous, Martha. It's my house, too. Is it? You're the one who left. I crossed my arms, blocking the entrance. Behind me, Adam appeared, his 6-foot frame imposing. Dad, he said coldly. Richard's expression hardened. I see you've turned them against me already. You did that yourself, Emily said, joining us, by stealing from Mom and sleeping with someone our age. Richard's face flushed. You don't understand. We understand perfectly, Emily interrupted. Mom, we've got this. Take a break. I retreated to the kitchen, hands shaking as I poured a glass of water. Through the window, I watched a family walking their dog, normal life continuing while mine imploded. When I returned, Richard was gone, and Emily was making notes. He wanted his golf clubs and some specific files, she explained. We told him to put it in writing through his lawyer. He didn't like that, Adam added with grim satisfaction. That night, after they left, I stood in the garage, staring at Richard's gleaming Corvette. 40% mine, symbol of his midlife crisis and our joint financial decisions. My phone buzzed with an email alert. Richard's lawyer demanding immediate access to all joint assets, including the Corvette. I forwarded it to Jack without comment. His response came minutes later. The Corvette might be our most valuable strategic asset. Do not let Richard take it. Also, I've prepared a motion to prevent him from closing on the Michigan property while divorce proceedings are pending. The next morning, I drove to work in my sensible sedan, leaving the Corvette safely locked in the garage. During lunch, I hesitated, then searched Timothy Gaines' classic cars. His contact information appeared immediately. He was the CEO of a successful tech company and a well-known collector of rare vehicles. I remembered him clearly from company events, always complimenting Richard's Corvette, even offering to buy it on several occasions. Richard had proudly told everyone that Timothy had been searching for that exact model, color, and specification for years. I drafted an email but didn't send it yet. This wasn't a decision to make impulsively. Instead, I called Jack. If I sold the Corvette, I asked, would that complicate the divorce? Not if it's documented properly, he replied. As co-owner, you have the right to sell it, but you'd need to account for the proceeds in the divorce settlement. I'd need to prepare specific documentation to protect you. I considered this information carefully. How long would that take? A few days at most. For the first time in months, I smiled genuinely. Not in triumph, but in possibility. Richard had taken my dignity, my security, my future plans, but he'd forgotten one crucial fact. I wasn't just his wife. I was an accountant. I understood assets, leverage, and timing. I drove home slowly, mentally cataloging my resources. The house, joint ownership. The Corvette, joint ownership. My salary, my professional network, my children's support, and my growing anger. An emotion I'd suppressed for decades that now felt like rocket fuel. In our bedroom, I packed Richard's remaining clothes into garbage bags. Not folded, not organized, just shoved inside. A petty act, perhaps, but deeply satisfying. I was done being the perfect wife. I stayed up late that night, researching the specific legal requirements for selling jointly owned property during divorce proceedings. By morning, I knew exactly what steps I needed to take. This wouldn't be a rash decision made in anger, but a calculated move to secure what was rightfully mine. Early May 2025. Early May brought a tentative plan and an unexpected development. Richard wanted to talk. He suggested meeting at a coffee shop, neutral territory, to discuss the situation before the lawyers made things worse. Diane and Jack advised against it. But something in his message made me curious. I agreed, choosing a busy cafe near my office. Richard arrived looking thinner, less polished. His designer shirt was wrinkled, his eyes shadowed. I waited for satisfaction at his dishevelment, but felt only a distant sadness. "You look good," he said, sliding into the booth. "What do you want, Richard?" He sighed heavily. "Can't we be civil? 35 years together deserves that much. Civility ended when you called me too old and boring while stealing our retirement fund." I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. I stirred my coffee, studying him. The familiar manipulation, attack, retreat, appeal to history. How had I never seen this pattern before? "Is Rebecca enjoying the lake house?" I asked flatly. His expression tightened. "This isn't about her, isn't it? This is about us finding a reasonable solution." He leaned forward. "The lawyers are bleeding us dry. We could settle this ourselves." "On what terms?" "Simple division. You keep the house temporarily. I keep the investments and the Corvette. We sell the house next year and split the proceeds." I nearly choked on my coffee. "The investments you already spent on your lake house down payment? And what about the $45,000 you took? That's gone, Martha. Business venture that didn't pan out." "You mean the down payment on your lakefront property that's still in escrow?" His jaw clenched. "The point is, fighting will only cost us both. Be reasonable." "Reasonable," I repeated softly. "Like you were when planning your exit for a year? Taking our savings? Lying to my face?" "Martha." "No, Richard. You don't get to decide what's reasonable anymore." I stood, dropping cash from my coffee. "The lawyers will handle it." "Don't be stupid," he hissed. "You can't afford this fight." I leaned down, my voice steady. "Watch me." The exchange confirmed what I needed to know. Richard was desperate to settle quickly. The expensive downtown lawyer was draining his resources. Rebecca was expecting the lifestyle Richard had promised, and the Corvette, his precious status symbol, was a pressure point. Back at my office, I finally sent that email to Timothy Gaines. "Mr. Gaines, we met at several Henderson financial events. I'm Martha Wilson, and I believe you expressed interest in my husband Richard's Corvette. I'm writing to inquire if you're still interested in acquiring it." His response came within an hour. "Mrs. Wilson, Absolutely still interested. I've been searching for that exact configuration for nearly 3 years. What prompted the decision to sell? Is Richard finally willing to part with it? I carefully composed my reply. Our circumstances have changed. I'm a co-owner of the vehicle and am prepared to discuss a sale. However, I should disclose that Richard and I are separating, and while I have legal authority to sell as a co-owner, I want to be transparent about the situation. Timothy's response was immediate and understanding. I'm sorry to hear about your situation. I appreciate your transparency. This doesn't change my interest. Would you be comfortable with my having it professionally appraised? I'm prepared to offer fair market value plus a premium, given its rarity. Over the next week, Jack prepared the necessary documentation while Timothy arranged for an independent appraisal. The process was meticulous. This needed to be beyond reproach legally. The appraiser valued the Corvette at $72,000, and Timothy immediately offered $78,000, citing its exceptional condition and the specific configuration he'd been seeking. Jack reviewed the offer and confirmed it was more than fair. Just to be clear, I asked Jack during our final review, this is completely legal? Absolutely, he confirmed. You're a co-owner with equal rights to the property. We've documented everything properly, and you're accounting for the proceeds in the divorce proceedings. Richard won't like it, but he can't legally stop it. And the timing? The sooner the better, before he tries to claim exclusive use of the vehicle or files motions to prevent its sale. That evening, I drove the Corvette to a detailing shop, paying extra for same-day service. The car needed to be immaculate. While waiting, I compiled maintenance records, registration documents, and the title showing both our names. At home, I moved the Corvette to the street, parking my sedan in the garage instead. A small gesture of reclamation. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Reconsidered my offer? I didn't respond. Timothy arrived promptly at 6 the next evening, whistling appreciatively at the gleaming Corvette. She's even more beautiful than I imagined. He circled the car, examining every detail, before taking it for a test drive. When he returned, his eyes sparkled. The appraisal was accurate, he confirmed. Everything's in excellent condition. I'm prepared to complete the purchase as discussed. I'll need a few days to finalize the paperwork, I told him. Of course, I understand the delicacy of the situation. He shook my hand, his grip firm. I've wanted this model for years. I'll wait. After he left, I sat in the Corvette one last time, running my hands over the leather steering wheel. Richard's pride and joy. Our joint investment, soon to be my leverage. I started the engine, feeling its power vibrate through me, and smiled. Not Richard's practiced smile or my own polite one, but something new, fierce and uncompromising. Mid-May 2025. The documents arrived by courier on a Wednesday morning. Transfer of title forms, bill of sale, everything needed to sell the Corvette. Jack had been thorough, including an acknowledgement that the proceeds would be declared in the divorce proceedings. This protects you, he'd explained. Shows good faith while recovering what Richard took. I signed my portion, leaving the seller's section for Richard Blank, a calculated risk. That afternoon, I drove to the bank and opened a safety deposit box, securing the Corvette's title and maintenance records. Richard still had keys to the house. I couldn't risk him finding my plans. At work, I buried myself in spreadsheets, finding comfort in their orderly rows and predictable formulas. Numbers never lied or betrayed. My assistant knocked gently on my door. Mrs. Wilson? Your daughter's here. Emily entered, looking professional in her law firm suit. Surprise lunch, she suggested. Over salads at a nearby cafe, she handed me a folder. Research on the Michigan property, she explained. Dad paid $25,000 down, but the total is $450,000. The mortgage is approved, but hasn't closed yet. Our motion to prevent the purchase during divorce proceedings has been filed, but we're waiting on a hearing date. So he's committed but hasn't completed the purchase, I mused, scanning the documents. Exactly. And there's more. Emily leaned forward. Rebecca visited the office yesterday. Dad's secretary overheard them arguing about money. I raised an eyebrow. Trouble in paradise? Apparently, Rebecca expected a certain lifestyle. Emily's smile was coldly satisfied. One dad can't maintain while paying his lawyer and potentially losing that down payment if he can't close on the lake house. The information crystallized my resolve. Richard wasn't just feeling financial pressure. He was desperate. Rebecca was younger, yes, but also accustomed to luxury. Luxury Richard had promised using our money. Thanks for this, I said, tucking the folder into my bag. It helps. Mom, Emily hesitated. Adam and I are worried about you alone in that house. Why not stay with one of us for a while? I appreciate that, sweetheart, but I need to reclaim my space. I squeezed her hand. Besides, I'm not the same woman Dad left. That evening, Richard called for the first time since moving out. Not texted, called. Martha, we need to talk about the Corvette. What about it? I need it back. It's mine. Our names are both on the title, I reminded him. Don't be difficult. You know it's my car. Actually, I contributed 40% of the purchase price. From my personal savings. Silence then. What do you want, Martha? What makes you think I want anything? Everyone wants something. His voice hardened. Name your price. It's not for sale, Richard. Not to you anyway. He cursed, a rare break in his polished facade. This is petty, even for you. Goodbye. Richard. I hung up, my heart pounding but my resolve stronger. His reaction confirmed everything. The Corvette wasn't just transportation. It was his identity, his proof that he was still young, vital, desirable. My phone immediately rang again. Richard. I declined the call, then again, and again. Finally, a text. This isn't over. I forwarded the message to Jack, who responded immediately. Change the garage code. Document any communication. Don't engage. The next morning, I met with Timothy and Jack at the notary's office. The paperwork was comprehensive. A clear bill of sale, documentation of my co-ownership, a legal statement acknowledging the sale would be reported in divorce proceedings, and receipts for the certified funds. I wish all my clients were this thorough, the notary commented as she stamped the documents. Timothy handed me a cashier's check for $78,000. Thank you for making this so professional, Martha. I know this couldn't have been easy. I appreciated his discretion. He understood this wasn't just a car sale, but a pivotal moment in my life's upheaval. Back at my office, I sat with the check, contemplating my next steps. $78,000. Enough to recover the stolen $45,000 and fund something even more valuable, my independence. At the bank, I deposited $45,000 into my new personal account, obtaining documentation of the transaction for the divorce proceedings. For the remainder, I requested a bank check made out to a cruise line I'd been researching for years. The bank manager, who had helped me open my new accounts after freezing the joint ones, looked at me curiously. Planning a trip, Mrs. Wilson? Yes, I replied. One I've been waiting for my whole life. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, a familiar figure waited on the porch. Richard, his face thunderous. Where is my car? He demanded as I approached. I brushed past him to unlock the door. Sold. You what? He followed me inside, slamming the door. You had no right. I had every right. My name was on the title. That was my car. And that was our retirement fund you stole. I faced him calmly. Consider us even. Richard's face contorted with rage. I'll sue you for this. Go ahead. My lawyer has all the documentation showing I owned 40% and that you removed $45,000 from our joint savings. The judge will be very interested in that story. For the first time in our marriage, I saw Richard speechless with fury. He grabbed his keys, the house key I'd forgotten to take. This isn't over, he snarled. Actually, Richard, it is. The locks change tomorrow. I opened the door. Goodbye. After he left, I sank onto the couch, adrenaline draining. I'd done it. Taken control, seized an advantage, acted decisively. The woman who had meekly accepted Richard's criticism and lies was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone I was just beginning to know. Late May 2025. You did what? Diane nearly shouted over lunch. Sold the Corvette, I repeated calmly. For $78,000. Diane's shock dissolved into laughter. Martha Wilson, you magnificent creature. She raised her water glass in a toast, to reclaiming what's yours. I clinked my glass against hers, the first genuine joy I'd felt in months bubbling through me. Richard's lawyer called Jack this morning, I explained, threatening all sorts of legal action. Empty threats. The car was jointly owned, and you documented everything. Diane leaned forward. What did you do with the money? Recovered the $45,000 Richard took. The rest is for something special. The cruise? I nodded. I've been researching options. 14 days through the Mediterranean. Barcelona, Santorini, Venice. When? July. There was a cancellation for a suite with a balcony. something that's usually booked a year in advance. I took it as a sign. Diane's eyes widened. That's only 6 weeks away. Why wait? The divorce will drag on for months. Richard is trying to drain what's left of our assets. I need to secure something for myself now. And if Richard objects, let him. The judge will see I took exactly what was stolen from me, plus my fair share of one asset. Meanwhile, he's still hiding money in Michigan real estate. My phone buzzed. An email from Jack. Richard's lawyer was demanding an emergency hearing about the Corvette sale. Game on, I murmured, forwarding it to Diane. Back at my office, I opened my browser and finally did what I'd only dreamed of for decades. I booked a Mediterranean cruise for July. Solo traveler. Balcony suite. The confirmation email brought tears to my eyes. Not from sadness, but from the stunning realization that I was, at 57, making decisions purely for myself for the first time in my adult life. That evening, I returned home to find Richard's silver BMW in my driveway. He stood on the porch, composed again, his lawyer mask firmly in place. "We need to talk," he said as I approached. "My lawyer speaks to your lawyer now. Martha, be reasonable. This vendetta is beneath you." I unlocked the door, ignoring him, but he followed me inside. "You sold my car to punish me," he continued. Childish and vindictive. I set down my purse, turning to face him. "I sold the car that was 40% mine to recover the money you stole. I didn't save it for court." "Richard," I crossed my arms. "Why are you really here?" His confident facade cracked slightly. "The Michigan property. There's an issue with the closing." "Let me guess. The court granted our motion to prevent the purchase during divorce proceedings?" Richard's surprised expression confirmed my guess. Emily had texted me earlier that the judge had issued a temporary restraining order preventing Richard from completing the purchase until the divorce was further along. "That property represents my future," he said tightly, as the cruise fund represented mine. "Funny how that works. Rebecca left," he blurted. "Said she didn't sign up for a financial mess." The admission hung between us. Richard, abandoned by the younger woman he'd sacrificed everything for. In another life, I might have felt satisfaction. Now I felt nothing but tired detachment. Again, not my problem. "Martha, we were married for 35 years. That has to count for something. It counted for nothing when you called me old and boring, when you stole our savings, when you moved another woman into a house bought with our money." Richard sank onto the couch, our couch, looking suddenly old. "I made a mistake." "No, Richard, you made choices. Calculated, deliberate choices over many months. We could start over," he suggested quietly. "Rebuild." For a heartbeat, I saw our history flash before me. The young couple we'd been, the life we'd built, the dreams we'd shared. Then I remembered his cruelty, his lies, his betrayal. "There's nothing to rebuild," I said firmly. "Please leave. The hearing will proceed as scheduled. Your lawyer, my lawyer, a judge, very civilized." He stood slowly, defeat visible in every line of his body. At the door, he paused. "I never thought you'd fight back like this." "That was your mistake," I replied. "You never really knew me at all." After he left, I changed into comfortable clothes and opened my laptop, reviewing my cruise itinerary. Barcelona, Monte Carlo, Florence, Rome, Amalfi, Santorini, Athens, Venice. Places I dreamed of for decades, pinned to my office bulletin board, researched during lunch breaks. My phone rang. Emily. "Dad just called Adam," she said without preamble. "Sounding pathetic. Said you're being unreasonable about some car sale." I explained what had happened. "Mom, that's impressive." Emily's voice held new respect. "But be careful. Dad sounds desperate." "I'm prepared. Jack has everything documented, and the hearing will show I acted legally." "What about the cruise? What about it?" "Dad could try to block you from leaving the country during divorce proceedings. I hadn't considered that possibility." "Can he do that?" "He can try, but we can counter with a temporary travel order. I'll talk to Jack tomorrow." After hanging up, I poured a glass of wine and stepped onto the back patio. The spring evening was mild, the garden Richard had never noticed beginning to bloom. I'd always tended it alone anyway. Tomorrow would bring the hearing, Richard's anger, legal maneuvers. But tonight, I had this moment of peace, and the knowledge that I was no longer waiting for permission to live my life. I raised my glass to the darkening sky. "To new horizons," I whispered. Early June 2025. The courthouse intimidated with its marble columns and echoing halls, but I walked in with my head high. Diane and Jack flanking me. Richard and his attorney waited outside the courtroom, both in expensive suits that couldn't hide their tension. "Remember," Jack murmured, "let me do the talking. The judge just needs to understand you acted within your legal rights." The hearing took 2 hours, longer than anticipated. Richard's attorney argued passionately that I had deliberately undermined Richard's interests by selling a vehicle primarily used by him. Jack countered with detailed documentation of my co-ownership, my financial contribution to the purchase, and the paper trail of Richard's unauthorized withdrawals from our joint accounts. Judge Martinez, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, reviewed everything carefully before addressing us. "Mrs. Wilson," she said finally, "did you sell this vehicle to deliberately harm your husband's interests?" "No, Your Honor. I sold it to recover funds that had been removed from our joint accounts without my knowledge or consent." Richard's attorney objected, but the judge silenced him with a look. "Mr. Wilson, did you withdraw $45,000 from joint accounts in the 6 months prior to separation?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "For investments, Your Honor? Investments your wife was aware of and consented to?" His silence was damning. Judge Martinez shuffled her papers. "I see no impropriety in Mrs. Wilson's actions. The vehicle was jointly owned, and she has properly documented the sale and proceeds." Motion denied. Outside the courtroom, Richard cornered me while our attorneys conferred. "Happy now?" he hissed. "You've humiliated me in front of everyone. That wasn't my intention." "Bullshit. You're enjoying this." I studied the stranger before me, this angry, diminished man I'd once built a life around. "No, Richard, I'm not enjoying any of this. I'm surviving it." His face flushed. "Rebecca called yesterday, wants to talk things through." "Congratulations. She doesn't know about the car. Or the hearing." I understood then. He was terrified of losing face with Rebecca. The younger woman had left when money problems surfaced, but might return if Richard maintained his successful facade. "Your secret's safe with me," I said, turning away. "I have no interest in your relationship." Jack appeared at my elbow. "Everything okay here?" "Fine," I replied. "We're finished." Richard's attorney beckoned him, and he left without another word. "Good news," Jack said as we walked toward the exit. "The judge's ruling establishes a precedent for our case. Richard made unilateral financial decisions that hurt the marital estate. That strengthens our position on the Michigan property and other disputed assets. What about my travel plans? I filed the motion this morning for a temporary travel order. With today's ruling, I'm optimistic. You've demonstrated good faith by documenting everything and recovering only what was taken, plus your fair share of one asset." Outside, the June sun was blinding after the dim courthouse. I slipped on sunglasses, suddenly exhausted by the morning's confrontation. "What now?" I asked. "Now we prepare for the next phase," Jack replied. "Financial discovery, temporary support arrangements, property division negotiations. The divorce itself will likely take 6 to 9 months to finalize, but today was a significant win, Martha. Remember that." At home, I changed into comfortable clothes and sat on the patio with my laptop, finalizing details for my cruise. Diane had agreed to join me. Emotional support and wine-drinking companionship, she'd called it. Emily called that evening with unexpected news. "Adam and I filed an additional petition this morning," she explained. "We got a temporary restraining order preventing Dad from selling the house until the divorce is finalized." "You what?" I sat up straighter. "How?" Dad's lawyer mentioned his intention to list the property during a sidebar conversation with Jack. "Big mistake." I could hear the satisfaction in Emily's voice. "The judge agreed that major assets shouldn't be liquidated during proceedings. Does Richard know?" "He will when he tries to list it." Emily paused. "Mom, are you really going on this cruise next month?" "Yes, I need this, Emily." "I understand." Her voice softened. "I'm proud of you, you know. Most people would have crumbled." After we hung up, I wandered through the house that had been my home for 3 decades. Every room held memories, children growing up, holidays, quiet evenings, arguments, reconciliations. Soon, it would be sold. Another loss, but perhaps also a liberation. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Rebecca. We should talk." I stared at the message, shock giving way to cold anger. The audacity of this woman to contact me after months of sneaking around with my husband, spending my money, planning a future in a house bought with my retirement fund. I blocked the number without responding and poured myself a glass of wine. Whatever drama was unfolding between Richard and Rebecca, I wanted no part of it. The next morning, an email arrived from Richard's attorney, formally requesting that I be prohibited from leaving the country until divorce proceedings concluded. Jack responded immediately, citing case precedent for temporary travel orders and emphasizing that I'd return well before any critical hearings. 2 weeks of legal back and forth followed. Finally, Judge Martinez issued her ruling. I could take my planned vacation provided I posted a $5,000 bond ensuring my return. A small price for freedom. Richard made one last desperate attempt, showing up at my office unannounced. "Don't do this, Martha," he pleaded as security escorted him out. "We need to talk before you leave." I said nothing, watching him struggle against the inevitable, just as I had months ago when my world collapsed. The difference was, I'd rebuilt mine. Richard was still trying to salvage the wreckage of his choices. 2 days before departure, I met Diane for dinner, our conversation turning from legal strategies to travel plans. "First stop Barcelona," she said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings." I clinked my glass against hers. "And to old friends who never waver." For the first time in months, I felt something like happiness. Not complete, not uncomplicated, but genuine. Richard had taken much from me, but he hadn't taken everything. What remained was proving to be stronger than I'd ever imagined. July 2025. July in Barcelona was a revelation of color, light, and possibility. Standing on the ship's deck as we sailed from port, Diane beside me, I felt 30 years younger, and somehow, simultaneously, more solidly myself than ever before. "Look at that view," Diane murmured, gesturing toward the receding coastline. "I've dreamed of this for so long," I replied. And now you're living it," she squeezed my arm. "On your terms." Our staterooms were adjacent, with private balconies perfect for morning coffee and evening wine. The ship itself was everything I'd imagined. Elegant without being stuffy, full of activities but with quiet corners for reflection. That first evening, dressed for dinner in a new dress I'd bought specifically for the trip, I caught my reflection in the elevator's mirrored wall. The woman looking back seemed different. Stronger jaw, straighter posture, clearer eyes. Not younger, but more present. "You look beautiful," Diane said, noticing my self-appraisal. "I feel strange," I admitted, "like I'm meeting myself for the first time." At dinner, we shared a table with 3 other passengers, a retired professor named Edward, a widow named Grace, and her sister Helen. The conversation flowed easily, touching on hometowns, previous travels, ports of call we anticipated most. When Edward asked if I was traveling with my husband, I answered simply, "I'm in the process of divorce after 35 years. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. "I'm not," I replied, surprising myself with my candor. It was necessary. Later, strolling the deck under Mediterranean stars, Diane linked her arm through mine. "You've changed, Martha. For better or worse? Definitely better. You're direct now, present. The old Martha would have murmured something vague about Richard being unable to join you." She was right. I'd spent decades smoothing rough edges, avoiding conflict, adapting myself to maintain peace. "I don't have energy for pretense anymore," I said. "Good. It doesn't suit you." My phone had no signal at sea. A blessing. Each day brought new wonders. Monte Carlo's opulence, Florence's art, Rome's ancient grandeur. I took hundreds of photos, not to share with anyone, but to capture moments of my rebirth. In Santorini, Diane and I sipped wine overlooking the caldera, surrounded by the blue-domed buildings I'd pinned to vision boards for years. "I should be sadder," I mused. 35 years ended, half our savings gone, the house will be sold. But I feel more alive than I have in decades." Diane nodded. "That's how you know you made the right choice." "I didn't choose this," I reminded her. "Richard left." "No, Martha. Richard strayed and stole. You chose to stand up for yourself instead of crumbling. You chose to reclaim your dream. You chose strength." That night, I emailed Adam and Emily from the ship's business center, sending photos and assurances that I was well. Their replies came quickly, supportive, loving, proud. Emily added news. Richard's attorney had proposed a settlement meeting for August. "We're in a strong position," she wrote. "The Michigan property's value has dropped 12% since Dad initiated the purchase. His financial disclosures show considerable debt. He's overextended and looking for a quick resolution. I closed the email without responding. Legal matters could wait. For now, I was fully immersed in the present, something I'd rarely allowed myself before. In Athens, our group from the dinner table took an excursion together to the Acropolis. Edward, the retired professor, proved an engaging companion, his knowledge of history enriching every site we visited. "You remind me of someone," he said as we rested in the shade of an ancient olive tree. "Who?" "My favorite student from years ago. She had your same quality of attentive listening, really hearing, not just waiting for her turn to speak." The compliment warmed me unexpectedly. When had anyone last noticed such a thing about me? "I was invisible for a long time," I admitted. "Even to myself." "Not anymore," he said simply. On our final night aboard, the ship hosted a formal gala dinner. Diane insisted we dress up properly, she in midnight blue, me in emerald green that matched my eyes. "One last hurrah before real life resumes," she said, as we entered the grand dining room. Edward stood as we approached our table, his appreciation evident. "Ladies, you look magnificent." Dinner was followed by dancing. I declined at first, but Edward persisted gently. "One dance," he suggested. "No strings, no expectations, just movement and music." On the dance floor, his hand light at my waist, I remembered how much I'd once loved dancing, another joy that had faded from my marriage years ago. "Will you be okay?" Edward asked as the music ended. "When you return home?" The question was unexpected but not unwelcome. "Yes," I replied, realizing the truth of it. "I will be." Later, we exchanged email addresses. Nothing romantic, just the connection of new friends who might keep in touch. The night before docking in Venice, our final port, I stood alone on my balcony. 2 weeks had transformed me, not into someone new, but into the woman who had been buried beneath decades of compromise. Richard's latest text waited on my phone. "We need to talk before the settlement meeting, please." For the first time, his plea evoked no emotion, neither anger, nor pain, nor satisfaction, just calm detachment. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours," I typed back. Then I turned off my phone and returned to the vastness of the starlit Mediterranean, savoring these final hours of the journey I'd dreamed of for so long. The journey that had become not just a vacation, but a passage to a new life. August 2025, March 2026. The divorce was finalized in March 2026, 8 months after my return from the cruise. The settlement proved anticlimactic after months of legal maneuvering. Richard, facing mounting debts and Rebecca's renewed expectations, agreed to terms more favorable than we'd anticipated. The Michigan property, which Richard had been prevented from purchasing, had since been sold to another buyer. The $25,000 earnest money he'd paid from our joint funds was ordered returned to the marital assets and divided equally. I kept the house but chose to sell it, unable to imagine building my new life in spaces filled with old memories. Richard received a fair share of the proceeds. Our remaining assets were divided equally, what was left of them after Richard's spending and the legal fees. The negotiations had been exhausting. Richard had initially fought every point, then gradually surrendered as his financial situation deteriorated. Rebecca had returned briefly in September, in Seoul, only to leave again when it became clear Richard would not emerge from the divorce with the wealth she'd expected. Standing in the empty house on my last day there, I felt a curious lightness. 30 years of life had been packed into boxes, donated, or discarded. What remained fit into my car and a small storage unit. "Ready, Mom?" Adam asked, carrying the last box to his truck. "Almost," I replied. "Give me a minute." I walked through each room slowly, not in grief, but in farewell. The kitchen where I'd prepared thousands of meals. The living room where children had opened Christmas presents. The bedroom where my marriage had both flourished and died. Outside, Emily waited beside her car. "The apartment is all set up. Just needs you." My new home, a bright 2-bedroom apartment in a renovated building downtown, walking distance to my office and close to both my children. A place entirely my own. "No regrets?" Emily asked as we pulled away from the curb. I looked back at the house one last time. None that matter anymore. The final confrontation with Richard had come during the settlement negotiations in August. He'd requested a private conversation before the attorneys arrived. "I made a terrible mistake," he'd said, looking older than his 59 years. "I know that now." "Yes, you did. Rebecca." He'd hesitated. "It wasn't what I thought it would be. It rarely is. We could try again, Martha, for old time's sake. The suggestion had been so absurd I'd actually laughed. The old times are exactly why we can't, Richard. I've changed. You haven't. That's not fair, isn't it? You're not here because you miss me or love me. You're here because your fantasy imploded and you need a safe harbor. He'd had no response to that truth. I forgive you, I'd told him, surprising both of us. Not for your sake, but for mine. I can't carry that weight anymore. Now, unpacking in my new apartment, surrounded by carefully chosen belongings, I felt the truth of those words. Forgiveness hadn't meant reconciliation or forgetting, just freedom from the burden of bitterness. My 58th birthday arrived in April, celebrated in my new space with Adam, Emily, Diane, and a few close colleagues. Among them was Edward, who had kept in touch after the cruise and now lived just an hour away in a university town where he still taught occasional classes. To Martha, Diane toasted, raising her glass, who proved it's never too late to begin again. Later, helping with dishes, Edward asked about my plans. I'm staying at the firm another 3 years, I told him, building a better retirement fund. After that, I'm keeping my options open. Any more travel plans? I smiled. Alaska next summer. I've always wanted to see the glaciers. Sounds wonderful, he said. I'd love to hear about it when you return. The slow, respectful courtship that developed between us over the following months was unexpected but welcome. 2 mature adults with established lives finding connection without desperation or false promises. Richard called occasionally about lingering financial matters, his tone always carrying an undercurrent of regret. I remained cordial but distant. When he mentioned that he'd been forced to move to a smaller place and delay his retirement due to financial constraints, I felt no satisfaction, only hope that he might finally learn from his choices. My blog about financial independence for women in midlife, started on a whim after the cruise, gained a modest but engaged following. Writing about my experience proved unexpectedly healing, transforming private pain into public purpose. Throughout the fall and winter, I gradually rebuilt my financial security. The process was slower than I'd hoped, but I found satisfaction in each step forward. My relationship with my children deepened in unexpected ways. They saw me now, not just as their mother, but as a woman with her own desires and strength. You know what I realized? Adam said during a Sunday dinner. I don't think I ever really knew you before all this happened. What do you mean? You were always Mom, making everything work, smoothing everything over. He smiled. I like this version of you. She seems more real. On cool evenings, I often sat on my small balcony overlooking the city lights, marveling at how completely life could change in a single year. The woman who had awakened each day at 5:30 to prepare her husband's breakfast was now planning solo adventures, dating without urgency, building new friendships, mentoring younger women at work. The Mediterranean cruise, my dream for so long, had marked not an ending, but a beginning. The journey I'd once imagined taking with Richard had instead become my passage to independence. When Emily asked if I regretted selling Richard's Corvette, I smiled. Not for a second, I told her. Best decision I ever made. Because it hurt him? No, I replied, understanding the truth as I spoke it. Because it was the first time I chose myself, the woman who had silently endured criticism, who had surrendered control of her finances, who had blamed herself for her husband's wandering eye. She was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, clearer, and finally, genuinely visible, not just to others, but to herself. And that, I discovered, was the most precious freedom of all. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel and don't miss the next video, with more stories that will touch your heart.